Welcome, everyone. And for our first panelist in this panel, Paths to Individuation, Eastern Wisdom, Alchemy, and Microcosmic Reflections, I want to welcome Andrew Frederick Burniston, Microcosmic Reflections, Eliade Corbin, and Jung at Aranos. Over to you, Fred.
Okay, thanks very much, Jonathan. I'm going to compress three big beasts into a half-hour talk, Eliade Corbin and C.G. Jung, and you've already had a lot of material thrown at you in the conference. I've absolutely no objection if you close your eyes and go into a trance. I can always send the script over afterwards. If you just want to follow the narrative that way, that's fine. Okay, Microcosmos, Mercure Eliade, Henri Corbin, and C.G. Jung at Aranos. When I first encountered Eliade as an undergraduate, I kept hearing these academics saying, oh, very, very dubious, very, very dubious, which only interested me more. I think the academics were suspicious of Eliade because he went beyond purely academic pursuits in his attempt to unpack religious symbolism. And I just want to read you out a passage that would be anathema to the methodologically orthodox.
Hello.
He writes, a considerable enrichment of consciousness results from the hermeneutic effort of deciphering the meaning of myths, symbols, and other traditional religious structures. In a certain sense, one can even speak of the inner transformation of the researcher and hopefully of the sympathetic reader. What is called the phenomenology and history of religions can be considered among the very few humanistic disciplines that are at the same time propedeutic and spiritual techniques. The conference is at Casa Aranos in Ascona, which ran from 1933 without a break to 1987, were established to promote this enriched consciousness. They have aptly been described as a gigantic symposium on symbolism. Eliade was a key participant, as was Henri Corbin and C.G. Jung. To illustrate how these three scholars deciphered the symbols and transform the consciousness of their readers or listeners, I will focus on one particular potent archetypal motif, the image of man as a microcosm. Eliade approached this symbol through the religious experience of archaic man, Corbin through Iranian Islam, and Jung through alchemy. Each of them conveys a vivid impression of what it is like to be a microcosm, or a second little world, which is contained in the vastness of the macrocosm. All three believe that it is possible to regain the sense of cosmic sacrality through a spiritual discipline of imagination, or active imagination. The implications of this proposal are little short of revolutionary. I begin with Eliade. There is only one way, says Eliade, to understand the symbolic universe of archaic man, and that is to place oneself inside it, at its very center, in order to progress from there to all the values it possesses. Close quote. Eliade's phenomenology gives us a view from the center. Archaic man's world is not an opaque mass of objects arbitrarily thrown together, but a living cosmos, articulate and meaningful. It exists because it was created by the gods, and consequently every aspect of this totality is an epiphany. As Eliade put it, the world reveals itself, or rather speaks, to religious man. And I quote, for religious man, the cosmos lives and speaks. The mere life of the cosmos is proof of its sanctity, since the cosmos was created by the gods, and the gods show themselves to man through cosmic life. When the world speaks to man through its heavenly bodies, its plants and animals, its rivers and rocks, its seasons and nights, he answers it by his dreams and imaginative life. His myths and symbols enable him to respond in a coherent way and to participate in the sanctity of the cosmos. He is at the center of creation, a microcosm, who finds in himself the same sanctity he recognizes in the cosmos. According to Eliade, archaic man is an instinctive Platonist, and conversely, Plato was the outstanding philosopher of primitive mentality. Objects and actions are real for him insofar as they participate in their celestial archetypes. This Platonic continuity was ruptured during the late Middle Ages, when the unity of man, cosmos, and transcendence broke down. According to the historian of religion Louis Dupré, nominalist philosophers of the 14th and 15th century placed so much emphasis on divine omnipotence that they removed God from the creation and left a rift between the realms of grace and nature. As the sense of cosmic sacrality receded, nature was reduced to an object, and gradually the human subject became the sole source of meaning. Although these developments brought an unprecedented increase in self-consciousness and self-determination, man was thrown back on himself, and he became confined to the immanence of the historical moment. Western theology never found a way to regain a unified world picture, and by the 17th century, the rise of the mechanistic perspective set the seal on the process of disenchantment. Yet Eliade, ever the optimist, maintains these developments were not necessarily irreversible. The history of religions demonstrates how all religious values are continually lost and regained throughout the millennia. Nothing is ever irrevocable. According to Eliade, the phenomenology of religion has a major role to play in the restoration of the sacred in our secular post-Renaissance culture. How does this approach work in practice? Eliade asks us to consider the homology between house, body, and cosmos. It is common in many archaic cultures. And he writes, man inhabits the body in the same way that he inhabits a house or the cosmos that he himself created. Every lawful and permanent situation implies a location in the cosmos, in a universe perfectly organized and hence imitated from the paradigmatic model of the creation. Inhabited territory, temple, house, body are all cosmoses. By stark contrast, modern man's habitation has lost its cosmological values, and his body is without religious or spiritual significance. But what would happen if we were to regain the understanding of the body-cosmos correspondences with the aid of a transformative phenomenology of religion? The consequences, say Eliade, would be incalculable. By regaining awareness of his anthropocosmic symbolism, modern man will attain a new existential dimension, totally unknown to present-day existentialism and historicism. This is an authentic and major mode of being which defends man from nihilism and historical relativism without thereby taking him out of history. This passage comes from an important essay on the symbolism of the center. In anticipation of those who regard such assertions as utopian, naive, Eliade points out that authentic existence cannot be confined to the consciousness of its own historicity. The universal experiences of love, anxiety, joy, melancholy, and so on, each have their own specific temporal rhythm, and all combine to constitute what might be called the integral man, who neither denies himself his historic moment, nor consents to be identified with it. In other words, the rediscovery of the body of a microcosm is not a retrograde step into magical thinking. The new existential dimension Eliade speaks of is the place of the integral man, who regains the sense of cosmic sacrality without renouncing his consciousness of or responsibility towards his situation in history. I move now to Eliade's close friend and colleague, Henri Corbin, and I've titled this section, A World in Which Spirits Are Corporealized and Bodies Spiritualized. Like Eliade, Henri Corbin believed passionately in the transformative power of religious hermeneutics. His approach is based on two complementary terms derived from Shiite Islam: Ta'wil, which means to cause to return, and Tanzil, which means to cause to descend. Whereas Tanzil applies to the descent of the Quranic revelation to the prophet, Ta'wil proceeds in the reverse direction, from the manifest to the hidden reality, from the symbol to its archetype. It penetrates beneath the literal content of a sacred text to the underlying spiritual sense. Ta'wil is not a disembodied intellectual exercise, because, and I quote Corban, it brings to play the soul's most secret sources of energy. These sources of energy will only become operative if salvation is at stake. The work of Tarwell delivers the soul from its exile in the quotidian world and makes an exegesis, an exodus, a return to the perfection of origins. The Tarwell of a sacred text is the Tarwell of the soul. Corban's scholarship covered a vast field: Sufism, Shiism, Ishmaelism, and also Iran's pre-Islamic traditions. The ancient Zoroastrian myth was based on the division of the cosmic totality into an infinite height of light, which dwells for all eternity, Ormazd, the Lord of Wisdom, and an unfathomable abyss of darkness that conceals the counterpart of negation, disintegration, and death, namely Aragon. These two powers are utterly irreconcilable, and the battle between them will continue until the close of the Ion, when the demonic counterparts will be cast into the abyss. However, Mazdaism is not Platonism. The domain of light is not acquainted with the spiritual world, nor is the world of darkness acquainted with a separate material world. There is subtle matter, Menop, and there is dense matter, Etik. This ancient tradition does not recognize a distinction between ideas and matter. There are just degrees of subtlety of matter. Iranian Islamic cosmology, however, takes a Platonic turn. There is now the sensory world, an intermediate world of the celestial angels who move the spheres, and there is the intelligible world, which is the realm of cherubic intelligences. Each of these three levels is apprehended for a distinctive mode of knowing. The sensory world is apprehended by the hylic or material intellect, whose operation requires a sharp polarization between subject and object. The world is experienced as being external to consciousness on this level. In the intermediate world, the subject-object relationship takes a paradoxical form. The active imagination is independent of the physiological faculties and belongs to the subtle body. Objects are constituted in consciousness as they are on the level of ordinary imagination, but they are also autonomous as they are on the level of sensory perception. Finally, there is knowledge of the intelligible world, which is attained only by the perfect sage. On this level, the subject-object relationship is transcended, and the adept becomes, I quote, a copy, an exemplar, in which all the universes of being are inscribed. He becomes an intelligible universe in himself. The Theosophists of Islam call this intermediate world Alam al-Mital, a term which presents a challenge to a translator. If he uses the word imaginary for this world, it implies fantasy in the pejorative sense, or make-believe. Corban coined the word imaginal to avoid this unfortunate connotation. The mundus imaginalis is the place where visionary experiences occur. Corban writes, we are not dealing with irreality. The mundus imaginalis is a world of autonomous forms and images. It is a perfectly real world, preserving all the richness and diversity of the sensible world, but in a spiritual state. Unlike the sensory world, where subject and object are split in two, consciousness and its objects are ontologically inseparable in the mundus imaginalis. Whereas acts of imagination in the sensory world are private and subjective, imaginal consciousness is not in me. It has cognitive value within its own world. Corban has uncovered many correspondences between Iranian Sufism, Ibn Arabi, and the visionary theology of Emanuel Swedenborg, whose dates were 1688 to 1772. And I'll be returning to him in connection with Jung. But here is what Corban says about Swedenborg. One cannot but be struck, he remarked, by the correspondence or convergence of statements by the great Swedish visionary with those of Suravadi, Ibn Arabi, or Sadra Shirazi. These affinities extend to Japanese Buddhism. D.T. Suzuki, also an Arana scholar, had actually translated 4 works of Swedenborg into Japanese, and he called Swedenborg the Buddha of the North. When Corban asked him how he understood Swedenborg, the Zen master picked up a spoon and declared, "This spoon now exists in paradise." Mushin Fayez was a 17th century Iranian theosophist and a poet who had studied under Mulasatra. He would have understood Suzuki's spoon code immediately. In his sayings kept secret, he wrote, "There is no existent thing, whether in the intelligible world or in the sensory world, whose image is not recorded in the intermediate universe. The universe is the macrocosm, as in the macrocosm is homologous to the active imagination of the human microcosm." The starry heavens of the sensory world have a corresponding heaven in the Mundus Imaginalis. This is Hercalia. According to the Iranian theosophists, Hercalia possesses its own earth. The celestial earth of Hercalia is constituted by the active imagination of the adept, who also provides the subtle elements he needs for his own body of resurrection. As Mushin Fayez says, "This is a world in which spirits are corporealized and bodies are spiritualized. The active imagination is an alchemical opus that participates in the creation of a new heaven and a new earth." Finally, Jung. I titled this section, "Understand You Are a Second Little World." Jung placed dream work and active imagination at the center of his therapeutic method. But active imagination takes on a different inflection when it is applied to a psychological rather than a strictly religious context. For Jung, active imagination is a technique of therapy that can lead to the experience of transcendence. For the Sufis, it is a method of transcendence that can have therapeutic benefits. While he was a medical student in the 1890s, Jung read all the books that he could lay hands on about spiritualism and the paranormal, including 7 volumes of Swedenborg. These works would serve him well after the catastrophic break with Freud in 1913. It was then that he followed Swedenborg's footsteps and ventured into the intermediate world. He has left an account of this journey in chapter 6 of Memories. When Jung encountered Elijah and Salome as real persons, he was following Swedenborg's precedent. In Heaven and Hell, for example, Swedenborg describes his meeting with the angels like this: "When I have been allowed to be in the company of angels, I have seen what was there exactly the way I see things in our world. So imperceptibly, I did not know that I was not in our world and in the court of a king here. I have also talked with angels, just as one person talks to another." Swedenborg's famous doctrine of correspondences has ancient antecedents. For example, the great father of the church, Origen, his dates are 185 to 254, said that man is a second little world containing the sun, moon, and stars within himself. This mythopoetic idea expresses a profound psychological truth. The microcosm, says Jung, was once projected onto the body, just as alchemists projected their own unconscious contents onto chemical substances. But, Jung continues, it is altogether a different matter when the microcosm is understood as that interior world whose inward nature is fleetingly glimpsed in the unconscious. And he goes on. And just as the unconscious is not a dissolving mass of particles, but rests in the unity of God's embrace, so man must not dissolve into a wall of warring possibilities and tendencies imposed on him by the unconscious, but must become a unity embracing them all. Marvelous definition of individuation. The individual who becomes an all-embracing unity is the integral man that Eliade spoke of in connection with his new existential dimension. His mode of being is characterized by openness to the world, not solipsism. In a short essay on resurrection, Jung felt exactly what this openness to the world meant. The realization of the self, with the capital S, means the re-establishment of man as microcosm, i.e. man's cosmic relatedness, Such experiences are frequently accompanied by synchronistic events. The prophetic experience of vocation belongs to this category. The self, says Jung, as its symbolism proves, embraces the bodily sphere as well as the psychic. In his essay on the child archetype, Jung describes the interrelatedness of body, of psyche, body, and world like this. The deeper layers of the psyche lose their individual uniqueness as they retreat farther and farther into darkness. Lower down, that is to say, as they approach the autonomous functional systems, they become increasingly collective until they are universalized and extinguished in the body's materiality, i.e. chemical substances. The body's carbon is simply carbon, hence at bottom, psyche is simply world. As the layers of the unconscious psyche recede towards the nadir and merge with matter, space and time become increasingly relativized. Jung designates this intermediate zone as quasi-psychic or psychoid. If we look towards the apex, the mundus imaginalis opens out as a hierarchy of lights. Time and space have been relativized in the opposite direction. There is, according to Jung, a paradoxical relationship between the lowest degree of darkness and the highest degree of light. For example, the serpent is both a chthonic and at the same time the most spiritual of creatures. In the symbolism of the alchemical vessel, or rotundum, the original man and the atom are identical. The round hermetic vessel, says Jung, in which the mysterious transformation is accomplished, is God himself, the Platonic world soul, and man's own wholeness. It is therefore another counterpart of the anthropos, and at the same time the universe, in its smallest, most material form. This paradoxical relationship between the heavy darkness of the earth and the Platonic world soul converts the vertical hierarchy into a circle, the Ouroboros serpent with its tail in its mouth. The coincidentia oppositorum between spirit and matter is also central to Eliade's interpretation of archaic mythologies, shamanic and yogic practices. And he writes, from a certain point of view, one may say that many beliefs implying a coincidentia oppositorum reveal a nostalgia for paradise, a nostalgia for a paradoxical state in which the contraries exist side by side without conflict, and the multiplications form aspects of a mysterious unity. Corbin seems to be a dissenting voice. While he has no problem with the coincidentia oppositorum between matter and spirit, after all, the mundus imaginalis is the realm of spiritual matter, he rejects the coincidentia between light and darkness, or good and evil. In The Man of Light in Iranian Sufism, he said, to deplore that Christianity is centered on the figure of goodness and light and entirely overlooks the dark side of the soul would be no less valid an evaluation if applied to Zoroastrianism. How could reintegration consist in a complicity between a totalization of Christ and Satan, Ormuz and Ahriman? These figures, Corbin maintains, are not complementary but contradictory opposites. Complementary elements can be integrated but not contradictory ones. In Corbin's myth of ascent, the Gnostic does not carry his shadow into Hakalia, he discards it. For Eliade, the image of man as the microcosm points back to our primordial wholeness and forwards to our eschatological perspective. It is the door to the new existential dimension, which defends man from nihilism and historical relativism without thereby taking him out of history. But what does this mean? Eliade does not hide a light under a bushel. For history, he declares, will one day be able to find its true meaning, that of the epiphany of a glorious and absolute human condition. We have only to recall the value attached to history by Judeo-Christianity to realize how and in what sense history can and might become glorious and even absolute. The idea of the fulfillment of history in the realization of a glorious and absolute human condition pervades the theology of St. Paul. In Corinthians, he wrote, "Lo, I will tell you a mystery. We shall not sleep, but we shall be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this imperishable nature must put on the imperishable, and this mortal nature must put on immortality. That's 1 Corinthians 15. Such affirmations, Eliade insists, must not be complacently dismissed because they imply the possibility of miracles. Why? The answer he gives is simple and uncompromising. If miracles have been so rare since the appearance of Christianity, the blame rests not on Christianity, but on Christians. Eliade's answer is testimony to the radical intellectual freedom that existed at the heart of Erinus. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. I'm going to stop the recording now and